Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
When you point, I will start my timer because I'm going to know exactly.
I'm already pointing.
Too soon.
I asked if you were ready.
I know, but then. Okay.
All right, I'm going to I'm pausing.
Welcome to the MuseCast. It's the first MuseCast after Christmas because that's how the days of the week work. Mm-hmm. We hope you had a great holiday, and this is the last MuseCast of 2020. That's kind of exciting.
Hey.
Yeah. I think. I'm Shawna Boren. There is Osheta Moore, and there is Dan Kent, and we are thrilled to have you joining us today. Osheta and Dan, I want to hear about your Christmas days. Like, I know you had plans and some ideas of how it would go, and did it live up to your expectations? How did it go for you guys?
Why don't you go, Dan? I'm so
excited. Ours went exactly according to plan, and we sat and watched movies, and we watched some of them were good, some of them were not so good. We watched an old Alfred Hitchcock movie called Dial M for Murder, which is sort of a classic.
Yes.
And that was really fun. We liked that one. And there's a couple Columbo villains that were in there before they were on Columbo. So that was fun to make those connections. And then we watched a movie called Love Actually, which had all of these stars in it. But I thought it was kind of a little disappointing. It was basically like if you were to take a beer commercial and the idealism and perfection of people in a beer commercial and try to extend that into a movie. That's sort of what it felt like to me. So that one was not as good. Then we watched a bunch of Christmas classics, and those are always good. And I always cry in It's a Wonderful Life, and so I did that and crossed that off the list, and it was fun.
That's awesome. Did you watch Christmas Vacation?
No, that's next year. So I'm trying to do it every other year now. So.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
You can still watch Christmas movies, though.
Yes.
Yeah,
you can.
Definitely. Well, we did watch Scrooged. That was the Christmas comedy we watched. This Scrooged.
Yeah, Bill Murray.
And that was not as funny as it was when I was a kid.
Oh,
hey, I gotta say this though. Let me just say this. What's his name? A Christmas Carol from 1982, George C. Scott. Holy cow. That is genius. It's brilliant. And he does just an amazing job. And he's got this subtlety that is just so amazing. And I watched that when I was younger, but I was too young to recognize the genius of this movie. And that movie was almost word for word from the book. And it's really... I recommend anybody who's a thinker to watch that and listen to the dialogue carefully, because there's a lot of depth and profundity in that. So Lewis Carroll's A Christmas Carol.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Dan. How about you, Osheta?
Christmas was really good. I made 2 casseroles that have completely changed my whole Christmas menu life forever. Mm-hmm. I made this French toast casserole from challah bread, which was so good. And then I made this like bacon, potato, pepper, egg bake. That was so good. So that was exciting. I know. I'm like, I will never make anything ever again on Christmas morning, because my Christmas mornings before were like pancakes made to order, or like waffles and like just like messy stuff. And I'm like, casseroles. Anyway, so that was fun.
Sounds delicious.
It was really great. It was a good day, like it's always hit or miss with teens, kind of like what kind of mood they're going to be in. And they overall were like just really joyful. We had like, I think every family has like a massive meltdown on some holiday. Like, we had one massive meltdown, but we all kind of recovered. And then we went to Glow that night at the state fair. And that was really fun because like I basically was like, I'm not cooking tonight. So fair food, like state fair food is dinner. So have at it. So they had like all these different booths set up, and it was like a drive up. And so my kids had like fried food for dinner on Christmas.
Perfect.
It was awesome. What was weird though is we tried to watch a couple of Christmas movies, but nobody was like in the mood. So like we started the Muppet Christmas Carol, we started Jingle Jangle. The only one we watched together, we watched The Family Man, which is Nicolas Cage. It's kind of like It's kind of like It's a Wonderful Life or like Christmas Carol kind of. It's so good. My kids sat through that. No, it was really great. I think the best thing about it, like my pro tip was I got the house like really cleaned and organized, like before like Christmas Eve. So then we woke up and the house was like nice and neat because it just became massively messy with all the boxes and wrappers so I felt good about that. But yeah, felt really good. And my husband got me this dragon that I put on top of my Instant Pot. And then you can turn it when you have to like let the steam out.
Steam
the pressure cooker, and the steam comes out of the dragon's mouth. So
That's perfect.
That's awesome.
So anyway, yeah. How was your Christmas?
It was so good. It was really great. We it was just our six, which was lovely and calm and just, we loved Jingle Jangle. We've watched that twice. I think one of my kids has watched it a couple more times on their own.
Wow.
And we watched Soul, the new Pixar one. That was sweet.
Is it?
Yeah, it was sweet. And then we did do Wonder Woman. I told you guys that. And I watched Christmas Vacation, but on my own, because I remember I told you my daughter was not having it. She was just so frustrated. So yeah, it was really nice. I really enjoyed it. It was just really relaxing. It just felt like a peaceful, joyful day, couple of days. So ready to conquer the new year, I think. I don't want to...
Do you see that meme where it's like, nobody claimed that 2021 is your year. We're all going to back slowly into the room.
I'm telling you, seriously, you guys, I had the hugest foreshadowing moment this year because it was, I think you remember this, it was January 1st. It was in the wee hours of the morning, January 1st of 2020, 3 a.m. when I fell down my stairs and fractured my hip. So,
oh my goodness.
That was... I should have just known right then and there that the year was just going to be.
Shawna, so, I thought that was like 5 years ago. I feel like that was like forever ago.
What is time? What is time? Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's got to be better than that, right? Okay.
Yep. Well, we're ready to build new practices in 2021.
Right. Yes, we are. We are. And so we got to kick off a new sermon series, and we had the pleasure of hearing from our friend Bruxy from up north in Canada. And that was lovely. And yeah, he, like Osheta said, he got us ready to kick off our new year with some new spiritual practices. And so Dan is going to kind of give us the lowdown and present the summary for us.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, having Bruxy with us, what a treat that was. I love that guy. He and we both kind of grew up watching horror movies. So that we have that connection. So every once in a while, like when I mention a horror movie or if he does, well, that'll spark a discussion and so forth. And you can just tell that we have that similar background. And someday we'll have to talk about our favorite horror movies on here. Yes. I don't know when, maybe next Halloween. So,
okay.
But Bruxy, we're kicking off this kind of short series, just a 3-week series on being salt and light as a church in this new changing world. And really, I think what most people are sensing is that, as sucky as 2020 has been with the coronavirus and all of that, it's forcing us to be creative and to make some big changes. And I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that if we go back to normal, a lot of those changes might not go away, and we might be a different church on the other end of the coronavirus. And so we're kind of looking at, what does being salt and light look like in this new changing reality that we're in? And so Bruxy kind of kicked us off by taking a look at, I think, a very important concept. And the way I thought about it when he was talking about it was that it's almost like spiritual selfies. He talked about, the importance of allowing the world to look at you, to see you for who you are. And he talked about how a lot of times we want to sort of punt and direct people to Jesus. But what the Apostle Paul says is that no, we are supposed to be the light of the world, and people are supposed to see Jesus in us, in how we live. And he talked about some really great examples, the story of Perpetua and Felicity, which I'm not too in touch with yet, and I want to learn more about this, because what an amazing story about these early kind of Christian martyrs, who one of them was at the lowest kind of status in society, what you might even call a servant or a slave, and the other one was a wealthy person, and they were both young women, young mothers, and they were these sisters in Christ, and they went and they were martyred together in the Colosseum. And and so the question is how do you get to that point? How do you get to the point where you are so equal with your brothers and sisters, and so devoted to Christianity and to Christ, that you are willing to give up any privilege that you have, and to give up even your life for the sake of this kingdom? And what he talked about is the importance of habitus, he called it. It is developing this character through these kind of physical habits. It's not this cognitive kind of know-it-allism. It's about what we do with our lives and our behaviors, and that very kind of tangible sort of thing. And he talked about it's kind of like fermentation, where through the process of living, like literally living, not just thinking, but living in love, we start to change. He looked at 1 Corinthians 4, and he noticed two things there that I think are important to this kind of mission that we have to be salt and light in this changing world. The first thing is that when the Apostle Paul talks to the Corinthians, he says that he is like their father, and there's this very intimate relationship that he has with the people who he is teaching and ministering to. It's not just I am the thought leader, or I am a life coach. It's literally, no, we are in family together. We are bonded. It's not simply a role. And then he says, imitate me, which I think is sort of the punch of Bruxy's message, is that we're supposed to be imitated. So we have to check our behaviors. We have to see how exactly are we living? Are we living the types of lives that we want other people to imitate? Are we living how we think that Jesus wants other people to imitate? And it's a very convicting message. And so then he just kind of talked about some examples of how we can develop these Christ-like habits socially, politically, and even financially. And then he really kind of closed it off by encouraging us not to put this teaching on the sideline by saying, well, I need to learn more, which I think is a pretty common justification for not actually living it out, is especially, us, we know a lot of academics, myself included, where it's just like, well, once I learn more, then I will be able to live this out. And he's like, no, you know enough. You can live this out now. And I think that's right. There's a diminishing return on what knowledge can give us. At some point, we have to live this out. And that's sort of the gist of his message, I would say, which I love Bruxy, and I am so honored that he's part of our community as well, and that the Meeting House and Woodland Hills have this relationship. A lot of great people there, and I look forward to how our communities continue to grow together. What did you two think?
There's a real true kindred spirit between Woodland Hills and the Meeting House, and I think there are several who know that already. I know, on our chats during our live streams, you'll see people on there who are like, hey, just came over from Meeting House. Now I'm ready to do Woodland Hills. And so we've had that for several years now, just that kinship and that camaraderie. And it's really beautiful. And I'm excited to see how it will further play out. In regards to Bruxy's sermon, it just felt so in line with, where we are. I know they've also done a series on the Sermon on the Mount. And so it just felt like super in line. I loved how we were challenged as the church body, the body of Christ, but also challenged individually. And it just reminded me of, and I don't know at what point in my discipleship that I heard this, but someone once said to me, you're not required to be perfect. That's not possible. However, people should be able to look at your life and see some form of Jesus, see some sort of character of Jesus, not by what you say, not by saying you're a believer or you're a follower of Christ, but your life should be some sort of example of the character of Christ. And so that is really challenging sometimes when you think about it. I mean, but I think the point with, or one of the points with Bruxy was that you don't arrive at that place overnight. You start where you're at and you grow in your discipleship, and therefore you grow in your likeness of Christ. And so I was really encouraged by what he shared. I was also challenged by what he shared. And I'm excited that we have 2 more weeks to kind of dive into this a little bit more and get a little meatier with it as well. How about you, Osheta?
Yeah, when Bruxy was talking about Perpetua and Felicity, I was thinking about we were on a drive with our kids like a week ago, or maybe it was a few days ago, because we drove by a lake that was like starting to freeze over, and like people were like on it, and my son was like, "That's really unstable, like that's really weird," like. And I was like, yeah, and it reminded me of the story of Dirk Willems, the Mennonite martyr, and how. And so I told my kids that. I was
That's
like,
right.
have you guys ever heard about Dirk Willems? And they were like, who? And because he was captured for being an Anabaptist. He was captured, and then he somehow was like he got away, and so he was running away. And as he ran across this lake, like he was like almost to the other side, and one of the guards following behind him, like fell into the lake because it was unsafe, like it wasn't fully frozen over. And instead of like running to freedom, like he ran back, saved the guard's life, and then he was captured again, and he went on to be martyred. And so I told my kids that story, and one of my kids even said, like, why would he even how would he even know to do that? Like I would have just kept running. I wouldn't even have noticed him falling. And it was the same sort of kind of question that Bruxy posits to us of like, how are we forming ourselves in the times where, in the like everyday, like ordinary times, so that when these extraordinary moments come up, we have a different reaction. Like we see the people and we know who we are in the midst of that. And we do the hard thing, even though it's going to cost us, you know? And so that I really am so inspired, and I think we need more stories of that. And so I loved how Bruxy even shared like his experience of like, I had this like my body just like did this thing because I had been training my spirit and my body to be a disciple of Jesus. And I just did this like scary thing after these like neo-Nazi guys. And so it's just like, okay, I think one, we need more stories of hearing people do that. But also like, we need to remember that discipleship is an everyday kind of thing. And I like, because I've been like studying the Sermon on the Mount so long for my book, like I love the reminder to like, or the idea of like memorizing the Sermon on the Mount. Like that's a really good place to begin with, and not like the word for word, but like listening to it over and over again. Like when I was working on my book, I listened to Letters from a Birmingham Jail from MLK over and over again to kind of get those concepts in my mind. What would it be like to like start every day listening to the Sermon on the Mount to kind of round ourselves in the center of Jesus's teachings? So I loved it. It was a really great sermon.
Yeah, and I really appreciated like the sermon was posing the question, like asking how the early church became so significant and experienced such growth. And the answer was not in them walking around pointing their fingers at people, telling them, you know, naughty, naughty, sinner, sinner. No, the answer is actually in the way in which they loved others and served others and were peacemakers during their time. And that is what drew people to them. And that is what caused the growth. And like you guys were saying, that didn't just happen because they decided this is what they like, didn't just determine within their mind, this is what we're going to be. That they had to train themselves in their daily practices. And I loved how very practical Bruxy got with us, even sharing the story about him walking around his home. And whenever he would knock into an inanimate object, like a chair, a couch or something, instead of like, you know, reacting, he trained himself to say, oh, excuse me, because he wanted to be able to replicate that when he was out in the world. And if he did like bump into someone or someone bumped into him or whatever, his natural reaction would be more of, excuse me, instead of anger coming after the person. And that seems so simple, but that's really where it starts. Like those everyday behaviors, when you're alone in your own space, You're not being watched by anyone. You're not being challenged by anyone. What are you cultivating within your spirit and in your reactions? So
yeah. I love that when he was talking about that. I just thought Bruxy is just kind of like this hippie Mr. Rogers, you know?
Right. He's like
just
a Yoda of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I imagine him walking in his living room saying, "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Ottoman." Which I know he's not doing that, but it's just, it was a funny image. And, but I think that's exactly right. I mean, you have like, you know, you have to, if you can't like do loving and gentle things in the easy situations, you'll never do the loving, gentle thing in the tough situations. Yeah. And so I think that everyday life offers a lot of these very mild tests that we can kind of continue to grow in. And Greg has talked about this a lot too. We're just like, you know, practicing nonviolence in kind of dull situations where, you know, even though it's like saving a spider, which I think spiders are pure evil, but look at, I'm going to save this spider and put him outside. And did you know that there are, for every individual in the world, there are 3 trillion spiders? For each, that's a statistic I read, and I'll find if you people want like support for that, I'll find it. But you know, saving that evil critter, that's an act of love. That's, you know, it's not going to change the world, but it changes me, and it makes me more likely to do something loving in a more serious situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just in your everyday happenings, right? It's when you're at the store and someone rams into your cart, or someone is rude to you, you know. Or it's like you have to choose to be others oriented in those moments. You have to do that reminder, like that Bruxy talked about, I am a Christian. Like even just something is like, and reacting out of that identity instead of like, kidding me. Especially when it feels like they're just like people, I have a really hard time. Let me say it this way. I have a really hard time when people are just inconsiderate of others around them. When people seem to be very self-absorbed, I really struggle with that. And so I have had to kind of train myself to not respond in kind whenever I see that happening, because it just really annoys me. And I get angry for the people that are a victim of that person's inconsideration. But that's part of the challenge, right? Is when you're faced with those moments, small or large, how you respond is something that you should be cultivating way before you ever leave the house, so that you can respond in a
that's right
way.
Yeah. That's good.
So how have you guys experienced that in your life? I mean, clearly, I think we're fantastic people, the 3 of us. I really like you guys. But we're not perfect people. And so how have you guys cultivated some practices in your life that pave the way for you to have an extraordinary response down the road? Is that something that you guys have been mindful of, or are starting to be mindful of?
Absolutely. Yeah. I can say a couple things first. There's 2 things that I've kind of used, like in anything that I've done good at, or I've excelled at, it's kind of followed these 2 kind of ideas. The first one is, a lot of times if I'm going to become a different person, there has to be a time period where I'm being something that I'm not yet. You know, I'm almost kind of pretending to be something else. And I remember, like, you know, being a D- student in high school, 1.3 GPA right here. And, you know, 5 years later, teaching my first class in college, that transformation took place because first I fell in love with learning. And second, I realized that I wasn't a very good student. So I had to become a better student. And I consciously decided, okay, I need to pretend like I'm a good student. And I was very fortunate to find a roommate who remains the smartest person I've ever known, Randy Barnhart. And I learned how to be a good student from him. But that involved a lot of just pretending to be this thing that I want to be, and kind of which allows me to kind of try it on. And because my limbs and my body and my time management are all different as this different type of person. And it's very awkward to me. And, but then I kind of grow into that and I actually become that type of person. And so I think some of it has to do with pretending, which is superficial. And I just have to be aware of that this is superficial because I'm not yet this thing that I'm trying to be. And I have to be tolerant of that superficiality. But then it becomes real and legitimate. And then the second thing is know that if you try to be a better person, there are going to be 1,000 different sources that try to sabotage it. And so one of the big sources for me is that anytime you're faced with a temptation, you're going to justify to yourself to do the thing that's tempting. And we're always tempted to do something that's destructive. We're hardly ever tempted to eat kale. We eat kale because it's healthy. We're not tempted to eat kale. But we are tempted to eat chocolate chip cookies. And so that's what we have to guard against. Or even exercise. We're tempted to be lazy. We're not tempted to go exercise. We do exercise because it's right. And so one of the things that I've done when I've been effective is that take the argument out of the moment. And so when we could go to the health club a long, long time ago in 2019, what I would say is that I'm not going to decide if I'm going to the health club or not. I'm not going to decide if I'm going to work out. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drive to the health club, and then that's where I'll have the debate with myself. I'll debate whether or not I'm going to work out when I get to the health club. And just putting me there totally changes my situation. And I'm a lot more likely to do the good thing, even though I'm tempted to be lazy and sit on my butt. And so those are probably the two biggest things, is that any type of habit or change involves a certain amount of superficiality and pretending, and you have to just push through that. And then the second thing is to find ways to eliminate self-sabotage. And one way that I do that is to make decisions in a more advantageous situation. Another way to do this is if you are tempted to drink, don't decide whether or not you're going to drink when you get to the party. So this is like the inverse of working out. Decide before you go to the party how you're going to handle the temptation of alcohol. And so that you don't have to even think about it. When you get there, you've already decided how you're going to handle that. And so just being able to work around temptation that way, I think, is the two things I would think about.
Thank you, Dan.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, Osheta, what are you thinking?
Well, I think that the first thing that comes to my mind is MLK's thought that the ends must be within the means. And so I think that when we are talking about something like discipleship, or we're talking about building practices or building habits so that we can look more Christ-like, we have to know what the end is. And so the end is that picture of Perpetua and Felicity holding each other up and loving and being supportive, even in the midst of great violence. And if our end is that, then we have to think about reverse engineer. What are the means we have to practice? And so for me, I do anti-racism from a peacemaking perspective, because I can't do anti-racism in a very power over dynamic where white people are shamed or things like that. And that's because I've been building these intentional practices of humanizing others, of loving my enemies, of giving names to animals and creatures, because I feel it's important to acknowledge all living beings are important to God. These kind of things all kind of built into me to where we're in this moment of a racial reckoning, and I'm okay, how am I a kingdom person as I'm doing this? And so I think for the first question I would ask everybody to kind of consider as they're building their practices, what does Christ-likeness look like? And who are the leaders that we're looking at that are modeling Christ-likeness? And then how do we reverse engineer? So what do we see in them? And then what do we need to, can we reverse engineer back to say okay, so maybe I do need to start walking through my house and saying, oh, excuse me, or praise God if you bump into something, if you don't want to be Mr. Rogers about it or something. How do you change those small things? And I also think that the important thing about the Perpetua and Felicity example is the community aspect, which I know Brexy landed with. And we cannot be the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is an alternative society, an alternative community. We can't do it without each other. And so I think it's important to be vocal, like with other believers, and saying like, I am going to try to do this work. Like I have like this anger streak in me that I've just been feeding and feeding and feeding. And so like, I'm going to try to cultivate more gentleness. And this is what it's going to look like for me. And if you see me like being snarky on social media, like that's an outlet of that anger in me that I'm just not handling well. Like you're allowed to check in with me about that. Or like, I'm going to read this book about management, or I'm going to therapy. I think it's super, super important for us to hold each other up like that, because when the rubber meets the road and we do bump into the brokenness of the world, like we want the Spirit of God to come out of us. Like we want to have already been building that, but we can't do that on our own. It's like Cyprus, is that his name? Like Perpetua and Felicity's mentor, like he came to be with them. And so I think that figuring out who your people are, who your accountability is. And I know we don't like that word accountability because it feels so like power over, or feels like it challenges our individualism or whatever, but like find out those who can cheer you on and hold you up, and then avail yourself to them and say like, I'm here for you too, because I think that is the model of love that the world looks in on and say, oh my gosh, that's totally different than what I ever imagined. So.
That was really helpful, Osheta. Thank you.
That's good, a reminder, because it's just so revealing in my own heart, because it's just like, oh yeah, community. That's the first thing I thought when you said that, because I am so like individualistic, and I don't even think that. It's like, I definitely think that I want to imitate people and I want to learn from other people, but the vision of the New Testament about community, I actually need my community to keep rubbing that vision into my head, because I just don't go there naturally. And so ironically, I need community to remind me of the importance of
remind you about community.
Yeah.
Well, you've said it out loud to Osheta and I, so we'll remind you here and there, Dan.
I appreciate
but I think so many people are in that boat. You think of, okay, how can I cultivate practices that will help me to be more Christ-like, so that when a big moment arrives, I respond accordingly. And while that is valuable and necessary and needed, you also can't do that in a bubble, in a silo by yourself. In order to do that, you do need people. And if you don't like the accountability word, then just use support, friends, comrades, or whatever it is but you need people, you need community to come around you and help you along the way. And it doesn't just, it's not just high-fiving you when you do good, but it's also in love saying, hey, Shawna, this seems counter to who I know you to be or who you're striving to be. So let's take a look at that. I mean, it's a both and in that regard. For me, when I look at it on an individual level, which, like I said, we do need to do, we've talked before about journaling, and I'm not a journaler, but what I am is a planner. Like I write out like the things I need to get done. And I also include in that anything I'm working on in the spiritual practice arena, because for me, that is like, if I write it down and I see it and I'm able to like check it off or whatever, it just helps me build that habit, the habitus kind of kicks in. Because otherwise, if I just leave it in my brain thinking, okay, I'm going to listen to this when I wake up in the morning first thing, then chances are won't follow through. But there's just something for me that works for me to write. If I write things down, I'm more likely to follow through. That's why like in 2020, I never once wrote down I'm going to exercise, because I wasn't going to do it. It wasn't about it. Didn't want anything to do with it. So maybe things will change in the new year. Another thing that's been...
Go ahead, Shawna.
No, just really another thing that's been helpful for me is actually a book my husband Scott wrote several years ago. It was called Difference Makers, and it was like this 40-day devotional guide of how just everyday people can make a difference for Jesus in their everyday lives. And it just helps me to circle back to that and just kind of read some of those stories and get that encouragement, because let's face it, we're not all going to find ourselves in a coliseum about to be attacked by lions and gladiators, right?
Yeah.
But we will find ourselves in other situations, and how we partner with God and allow him to move through us in those situations matter as well, and can have an amazing impact as well. So those are just a couple of tidbits. Osheta, sorry, you were going to say something?
No. I was just going to say, no, because you brought up a resource, and I think there are so many good resources and books about habit forming. But like one aha moment I had about habit forming as it relates to my discipleship is that our personality is like how we're made, like our like DNA, the form, like how our brains are formed, like that influences how we build our personality or our habits. And there's a book out called Better Than Before by Gretchen Rubin. And she has like these 4 kind of different personality types and how they form habits. And that for me was like super helpful, because like God made me the kind of person that like, I don't form habits just on my own. Like I really do like need somebody to like form a habit alongside me, or I need to like, if I'm going to go work out, I need to know like I'm the one that picks everybody up, because like that's part of. But anyway, so that was a really helpful book for me. She has like the rebel, the obliger, like she has like this whole list of like people, different personality types and how they form habits. And so I think that might even be helpful too, because like while like one spiritual practice may work for some, like another spiritual practice may not work for the other. And so I think it's important for us to kind of know that too. How did God make me? How do I build my habits? And then kind of build our regimen or whatever for habit formation, because we can't just do everything. Like we all just can't say, excuse me, Mr. Ottoman, like
right. That's just not how we're all wired. Right. Start where you are at, and know who you are. Start where you're at, and then begin just to take those steps forward. And I think before you know it, people will be able to look at your life and see aspects and characteristics of Jesus. Well, you guys, we don't have time to talk about all the things that we could in regards to spiritual practices and discipleship and being Jesus followers and being salt and light. But thankfully, we have 2 more weeks in this little mini series that we get to dive in. So that'll be really good. Dan, why don't you leave us and our audience today with just a beautiful word of wisdom to see us out? I know you have something in there.
Wow, that's so funny. I don't know if I do. You know what this reminds me of, Shawna? Shawna, I have people who they'll say, oh, this is my friend Dan. He's really funny. Dan, say something funny. And I'm just like, Well, I'll say this. I think one of my favorite quotes is, and Greg uses this a lot, and I think it's from Heraclitus, but it's, we start off making choices, and eventually our choices make us. And there is a sense in which we become our habits, and you see this like when you are, you can drive, you have a certain way that you drive a car, and you get so habitual in how you drive that sometimes you can lose sight of the fact that you're driving, and all of a sudden you're in your driveway and you don't even remember getting off the freeway. It's just your body takes over, and our lives are like that too. And that's really great, because that allows us to be able to walk down the street and think about God. We don't have to think about like, okay, now I'm lifting my left foot. Okay, now I'm lifting, and we don't have to do that because we have these habits, and so these habits can be very, very good. But I tell you what, you can get some bad habits too, and those bad habits can keep you from God and can keep you from God's love, and they can wreck your witness in the world. And so I just think that as disciples, one of the glorious opportunities we have is that we're called to continue to seek God. And I think part of what that means is to continue to seek where our habits are keeping us from God's love and from God's light. And so I just encourage people to think about, reflect on the small choices and the small habits that we have, and to think about, how those are making our Christian lives better or maybe worse. And especially coming up on the first of the year, it's a new year. Now is the time to kind of start to think about some of those habits.
Yeah. Awesome.
It's really good.
Turn it on gallery view, Dan. We need to turn it on gallery view so we can do our
okay,
group high
we're
five.
on.
All right, group high five. Good job, you guys.
Woo!
Thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate you so much. We'll see you next week. Be blessed, everyone.
Bye.